Why? Avoidants. Always go back to anxious exes. You know that text, the one that pops up months later. Hey, I've been thinking about you. It's from the avoidant ex you finally got over. And just like that, your heart does a backflip. But here's the real question. Why do avoidants always go back to anxious exes, the very people they pushed away? Let's break it down. When someone has avoidant tendencies, closeness feels like a threat. Intimacy, consistency, real vulnerability, it terrifies them. So they create space, they leave. And in doing so, they believe they're reclaiming control. But once the anxious partner is out of the picture, something strange happens. They start to miss what they ran from. Because for all their fear of being consumed, avoidants are still human. They crave love too. And anxious partners, they offer that love fiercely. They show up, even when it's messy. They care deeply, and they're willing to fight for the relationship. That leaves an imprint, even on someone who pretended they didn't care. The anxious partner becomes the emotional home. The avoidant keeps trying to leave, but can't forget. But let's be honest, this cycle isn't romantic, it's exhausting. When an avoidant circles back, it's not because they've changed, it's because they felt the void. Avoidants mistake absence for clarity. They confuse "I miss the comfort" with "I want to do the work." And anxious partners, if you're hearing this, listen carefully. Love is not proven by how much pain you can tolerate. Don't let the ping of a message revive the illusion that this time they'll finally choose you the way you've always chosen them, unless they've done the internal work to face intimacy and commit to change, because otherwise you're just repeating patterns, not rewriting them. So, to the avoidants out there, ask yourself what you really fear and stop borrowing love from someone who keeps paying in heartbreak. And to the anxious souls, your sensitivity is not a weakness, but your healing starts when you realize you don't have to chase what keeps running. Break the cycle. Don't be the safe space they only miss when it's gone. When someone has an avoidant attachment style, intimacy doesn't feel comforting. It feels suffocating. It's not that they don't want love or connection. Deep down, they do. But the moment that closeness becomes too real, too consistent, or too emotionally intense, their nervous system sends out an internal alarm. This is too much. I'm losing myself. That's when they begin to withdraw. Not necessarily in dramatic ways, but often subtly. They take longer to reply, make excuses not to meet, or emotionally distance themselves in conversations. And to the partner on the other side, especially if they lean anxious, this withdrawal feels devastating. It's not just space, it feels like abandonment. But here's the twist. Avoidants don't pull away because they don't care. In fact, it's often the opposite. The more they start to care, the more vulnerability to them is risky. Many people with avoidant tendencies develop this pattern as a response to environments where emotions weren't safe to express, or where independence was rewarded over connection. So when real closeness starts to grow in a relationship, they're not thinking, wow, this is beautiful. They're thinking, how long until I lose myself? How long until I disappoint them? How long until they see I'm not enough? Instead of moving closer, they hit the brakes. They use distance as protection, not because they're cold-hearted, but because they equate emotional dependence with weakness, loss of autonomy, or even rejection. So when an anxious partner shows up with all their emotional availability, loyalty, and craving for closeness, it's both attractive and terrifying. On one hand, the avoidant loves how much they're cared for. On the other, it triggers the part of them that wants to run. So when they leave or sabotage the relationship, it's not necessarily because they're done. It's because the emotional closeness got too loud. They step away, hoping to restore a sense of control and safety, but often fail to understand the chaos they leave behind. Meanwhile, the anxious partner is left questioning their worth, trying to figure out what they did wrong, often blaming themselves for the disconnection. This dance creates a cycle where both people are reacting from fear, one from the fear of engulfment, the other from the fear of abandonment. And in that space, love gets distorted. The avoidant isn't heartless, they're afraid. And until they learn to sit with intimacy without interpreting it as danger, they'll continue to leave the very connection they long for. Anxious partners have a unique emotional intensity that avoidants often find deeply magnetic. They love fully, give generously, and often make it their mission to understand and support the people they care about. To an avoidant, this level of devotion can feel overwhelming during the relationship, but after it ends, it becomes the very thing they start to crave. There's something unforgettable about being loved that deeply, even if it felt too close to handle at the time. Avoidants often don't realize what they had until it's no longer in front of them. When the anxious partner finally stops reaching out, stops chasing, and begins to detach, the avoidant starts to notice the silence. Not just the absence of texts or calls, but the absence of that emotional cushion they had grown used to. The anxious partner was the one who always checked in, who remembered the little things, who forgave easily, who tried to hold the connection together, even when it was falling apart. That kind of emotional labor leaves a deep imprint, even if it wasn't fully appreciated at the time. What avoidants often miss is the stability the anxious partner provided beneath their perceived neediness. While it may have felt like pressure during the relationship, it was also consistency. That person was showing up. That person was available, reliable, emotionally present. Traits the avoidant may not have had access to in their own upbringing or past experiences. So when the anxious partner walks away, there's a void that's hard to ignore. The avoidant begins to romanticize the connection, remembering the warmth and the emotional safety that was offered. They start to reframe the relationship through a nostalgic lens. They remember the care but forget the chaos, the arguments, the way they pulled away again and again. And because they aren't always in touch with their own emotional needs, they confuse longing with love. They mistake missing someone's emotional support for being ready to return and commit. This is why the pullback toward the anxious ex feels so strong. The avoidant isn't necessarily drawn to the person. They're drawn to the feeling they provided, the comfort, the validation, the steady presence. In the quiet after a breakup, that emotional memory resurfaces like an echo, reminding them of a connection they didn't fully know how to receive at the time. And often, they want to feel that again, not because they've grown, but because they're lonely in the absence of it. Avoidants often struggle to differentiate between genuine readiness for emotional connection and the temporary discomfort of missing someone. After a breakup, especially one with an anxious partner, they may find themselves feeling lonely, nostalgic, or even regretful, but that feeling doesn't always come from a place of clarity. It often comes from a place of emptiness. When the emotional intensity of the relationship fades and the anxious partner is no longer texting, calling, or showing up, the avoidant starts to feel the weight of that absence. It's not necessarily a sign they're ready to reconnect in a healthy way. It's more a response to the loss of emotional comfort they once tried to avoid. This is where avoidants get confused. They assume the aching feeling they're experiencing is love. They believe that if they're thinking about the person, missing them, maybe even dreaming about them, it must mean they want to be with them again. But that feeling is often a reaction to silence, not a reflection of change. Missing someone isn't the same as wanting to commit. It's not the same as being ready to handle the emotional closeness that made them pull away in the first place. In many cases, avoidants crave connection only when it's safely out of reach. When the anxious partner finally lets go or begins to move on, It removes the emotional pressure. The avoidant feels safer from demands or expectations, which creates space for nostalgia to surface. They romanticize the past without confronting the parts of themselves that caused the disconnection. This is how the cycle begins again. They reach out, believing their feelings are different now, only to repeat the same avoidant patterns when intimacy is reintroduced. Anxious partners are often quick to interpret this return as proof of growth. They want to believe the avoidant has had an epiphany and is finally ready to meet them halfway. But unless the avoidant has actively worked on their avoidance, learned how to stay present in uncomfortable emotional moments, and truly understands what caused them to retreat in the first place, they are likely mistaking temporary longing for emotional transformation. Avoidants tend to mistake the absence of emotional chaos for clarity, but peace is not the same as readiness. The calm after distance can feel like clarity, but it doesn't automatically mean they are now equipped to offer a deeper or more secure connection. Longing without self-awareness is just the beginning of another cycle, not the end of one. Anxious individuals often measure the strength of their love by how much they're willing to endure. They think, if I stay through the hard times, if I keep showing up even when I'm hurting, that must mean this love is real. This belief becomes a dangerous foundation. Over time, it teaches them to normalize emotional inconsistency, mixed signals, and even neglect. They convince themselves that loyalty means holding on no matter how little they're getting in return. But the truth is, love isn't proven by how much pain you can survive. It's revealed in how consistently and safely two people show up for each other. Many anxious partners fall into a pattern of over-functioning in relationships. They do the emotional labor, initiate most of the communication, try to fix problems alone, and make excuses for a partner's distance or detachment. They mistake anxiety for passion and confusion for chemistry. When the avoidant partner pulls away, it triggers a deep fear of abandonment, and in response, they double down, trying harder, loving more, forgiving faster. They believe that if they can just love enough, eventually the other person will stop running. This creates a one-sided dynamic. The anxious person becomes the emotional anchor for the relationship, but at the cost of their own well-being. Their needs become secondary to the mission of keeping the connection alive. They interpret the avoidance return as hope, a second chance, a sign that their patience and effort have finally been rewarded. But often, it's just the beginning of another loop. When love becomes a test of endurance, it stops being love and starts becoming survival. Anxious individuals need to understand that their ability to care deeply is a gift, but it's not a reason to stay in emotionally unsafe environments. It's not healthy to keep proving your worth to someone who only shows up when they're lonely, confused, or bored. This belief that love requires suffering is often rooted in early attachment wounds. Maybe love was inconsistent in childhood, or maybe they had to work hard to feel seen and valued. So they repeat that emotional blueprint in adult relationships, believing that love must be earned through sacrifice. But real love isn't earned by shrinking yourself to fit someone else's fear of closeness. It's found in mutual vulnerability, safety, and reciprocity. The healing begins when the anxious person realizes they don't have to chase someone to be loved. They deserve connection that doesn't require self-abandonment just to maintain it. When two people with opposing attachment styles come together, one avoidant and one anxious, it creates a relationship dynamic that feels magnetic, but is often deeply destabilizing. Each person activates the other's core fears. The anxious partner fears abandonment, and the avoidant fears engulfment. So one chases while the other pulls away, and both end up stuck in a cycle that feels both painful and familiar. They confuse intensity with intimacy, chaos with chemistry, and trauma with connection. The more they try to fix each other, the more they reinforce each other's wounds. Avoidants often believe they're protecting themselves by staying emotionally distant. They fear losing their autonomy, being overwhelmed, or being seen too closely. So they create space, not out of malice, but out of self-preservation. They don't realize that by avoiding emotional depth, they're also avoiding the possibility of genuine connection. Meanwhile, anxious partners internalize this distance as rejection. They believe that if they were somehow different, less needy, more patient, more perfect, the avoidant would stay. This makes them work even harder to earn love, which ironically causes the avoidant to withdraw further. This isn't just about mismatched personalities, it's about unhealed attachment wounds running the show. Until both people become aware of these patterns, they'll keep recreating the same relational script with different partners, thinking each time will be different. But new people don't change old wounds. Conscious healing does. That means avoidants need to look at the root of their fear of closeness and begin to tolerate emotional vulnerability without fleeing. They have to unlearn the belief that independence and intimacy can't coexist. For anxious partners, healing means building self-worth that isn't dependent on someone else's presence or reassurance. It means learning to self-soothe, to set boundaries, and to stop interpreting silence as a reflection of their value. When they stop chasing, they create space for someone to meet them with genuine emotional availability, not just temporary attention. The truth is, both the avoidant and the anxious are trying to protect themselves in the only way they know how. But their strategies, distancing and clinging, aren't working. They don't lead to deeper love, they lead to cycles of confusion and pain. Real healing begins when both people take responsibility for their patterns, not just their partner's behavior. Only then can they break free from the push-pull dynamic and create relationships rooted in mutual safety, not survival instincts. So here's the truth we often don't want to admit, especially when our hearts are involved. Avoidants don't go back because they've suddenly become emotionally available. They go back because the silence left a hole. They miss the safety, the care, the emotional consistency that anxious partners give so freely. But unless real growth has happened, unless self-awareness has been cultivated, what they're offering isn't new love. It's recycled comfort. And for the anxious partner, the lesson is just as important. Your love is powerful, but it's not a solution for someone else's avoidance. You can't save someone from their fear of intimacy by loving them harder. You can't heal a dynamic by playing small, waiting for crumbs, or proving your worth over and over. The cycle between anxious and avoidant partners isn't fate, it's a pattern, one that can be broken. But it only breaks when you stop confusing potential with reality and emotional intensity with compatibility. You deserve someone who doesn't just come back, but someone who stays, grows, and shows up with you. Someone who doesn't see your depth as overwhelming, but as beautiful. So if you've ever found yourself stuck in this loop, this is your moment to ask, am I repeating the past or creating something new? Because peace, security, and love aren't found in emotional chaos. They are found in mutual readiness. Thank you for spending this time reflecting, listening, and opening your heart to this message. Take care of yourself, protect your peace, and remember, the love you give to others is the same love you're worthy of receiving. Thank you, and goodbye for now.